Okay, so imagine this. What if your entire identity, everything people think about you, was basically born from just a simple misunderstanding? Like a chance encounter that gets twisted into this huge legend, and then it's relentlessly picked apart by every whisper, every rumor in this sprawling city. Imagine a world where your name isn't just what you're called, but it's this constantly swirling tapestry. It's woven from myth and accusations and honestly some pretty wild theatricality, always shifting, always open to someone else's interpretation. Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take your chosen sources and we distill the most fascinating insights, really giving you that shortcut to being truly well-informed. Today, we're plunging headfirst into the swirling linguistic currents of James Joyce's magnificent and, let's be honest, often bewildering Finnegans Wake. We're zeroing in on Chapter 2, specifically pages 30 through 40. And our mission today, well, it's to unpack the genesis of its central, really monumental figure, H.C.E. Humphrey Earwicker.
We're going to explore how his name and his reputation aren't simply given to him, but they're actually born and twisted and retold through this vibrant tapestry of myth, rumor, and frankly, uproarious theatricality. It's really a journey into how identity itself gets constructed.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating here, I think, beyond the sheer linguistic gymnastics Joyce performs, is how he doesn't just present a character. He actually constructs a legend right there, right before our eyes. And he invites us, the readers, to become part of that construction. We have to navigate this profound ambiguity of truth and the immense kind of shaping power of narrative. This deep dive, I think, will really illuminate how public perception, whether it's through, say, a king's mishearing or even a drunkard's snore later on, literally molds who someone becomes in the collective consciousness. It's quite something.
Absolutely. And whether you're new to Joyce or maybe you're a seasoned explorer of the Wake, well, you're in for an aha moment, or 20, I'd wager. We're going to reveal some surprising facts and hopefully just enough humor to keep you hooked. We're basically going to journey from HCE's pretty humble origins as a gardener all the way to his transformation into this mythic patriarch figure. We'll trace how a simple misheard phrase just balloons into this widespread scandal. And all the while, we're navigating Joyce's infamous wordplay and his, satirical genius. I guarantee you'll never look at a name or maybe even a rumor quite the same way again after this. #I, the genesis of HCE's name, from humdrum to HCE, pages 30-31. Okay, so let's dive right in. Let's unpack this initial introduction to Humphrey before he fully becomes the HCE we sort of come to know. Joyce, right off the bat, sets this incredibly playful, almost mischievous tone. He begins almost with a wink at us, the readers, by first just discarding a whole host of these older theories about HCE's lineage. It's like he's telling us, okay, forget what you think you know about noble origins.
He's definitely making fun of those elaborate, often quite pompous family trees, isn't he? The kind that tried to link everyone to some grand, heroic past. Joyce explicitly rejects these traditional genealogies. He tosses out theories trying to connect HCE to what he calls pivotal ancestors and the names, the Glues, the Gravies, the Northeast, the Anchors, and even the Earwickers of Settlesham in the Hundred of Manhood. He dismisses Viking origins, too, like being an offsprout of Vikings who had founded Wapentake. You get the idea. What's the effect he's aiming for here? By deliberately undercutting any kind of heroic stature with these comically mundane names like Glue or Gravy, is it just mockery, or is he laying groundwork for something deeper about identity?
Oh, it's absolutely both. That's a great question, because the surface level is just pure, delightful mockery. He's poking fun at anyone trying to establish these grand, noble lineages and giving us names like Glue and Gravy. Well, it deliberately deflates any heroic pretensions. It makes it clear that a name, a lineage, can be totally arbitrary, unglamorous, like common household stuff. But on that deeper level you mentioned, yes, this immediately establishes Joyce's really subversive approach to history and identity. He's showing us that identity, even for a figure who's going to become legendary, isn't some fixed, noble line rooted in an unblemished past. It's often constructed. It's an almost arbitrary narrative, really. It just underscores that a name is fundamentally a social construct, not some inherent truth passed down through generations. And by calling this the Priesternam's Prodromerith period, Joyce hints at this kind of mythic prehistory, a time before fixed identities where the very act of naming was still being figured out. It was less formalized, much more fluid. It's a potent reminder, I think, that all our grand narratives and origin are ultimately just stories we tell ourselves.
Okay, right. So after tearing down all those flimsy genealogies, the narrative shifts. It pivots to present what it calls the best authenticated version. And it claims this version is drawn from the Domlat, the reading of Hofed ben Eder, which immediately evokes these ancient, almost sacred texts, but, with Joyce's characteristic twist. This version tells us our protagonist, Humphrey starts out as a grand old gardener. He's saving daylight under his redwood tree one sultry Sabbath afternoon, Hagchivitch's Eve. He's depicted in this wonderfully mundane scene, plowing for roodles in the rear garden of Mog House, the old Marine Hotel. Pretty normal stuff. Then, almost like it's staged, royalty arrives, announced by a runner, halting on the high road along which a leisure-loving dog fox had cast followed, also at walking pace by a ladyback of cocker spaniels. So Humphrey, hot-faced as he was, rushes out to the forecourts of his public, and he's dressed in this comical, almost theatrical mix of clothes. Topies, her single, soulless scarf and plaid, plus fours, puttees, and bulldog boots, ruddled cinnabar with flagrant marl. Quite the outfit.
And here's the real kicker, the crucial part. He's jingling his turnpike keys and bearing aloft amid the fixed pikes of the hunting party a high perch, atop of which a flower pot was fixed, earthside hoist with care. This right here is a pivotal moment. It's where HCCE's destiny, or at least his name, is literally forged by a simple misunderstanding. It's such a vivid scene, almost cinematic.
It absolutely is, and it's just dripping with Joyce's characteristic layers of parody and symbolic meaning. Let's break that down a bit. Dummlat, as you hinted, is quite literally Talmud spelled backward. That immediately signals this playful reversal of sacred texts. It sets up a pseudo-sacred yet deeply ironic origin for HCE's story. And Hofed ben Edar directly roots HCE in Dublin. It means head of Hof, connecting him to a prominent local landmark, Hofhead, but giving it this almost biblical cadence. And Joyce continues blending the heroic with the everyday. That simile cabbaging Cincinnatus links HCE to the 5th century BC Roman statesman Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus, the one famous for returning to his farm after public duty. So it subtly implies civic engagement, but it also playfully alludes to HCE's rather mundane and maybe curly cabbage-like hair, since Cincinnatus literally means curly-haired in Latin. So he's both an ancient hero and, well, a garden vegetable all at once. It's brilliant. And then there's Hagchivitch's Eve. That's just a marvel of linguistic compression. It's this incredibly complex pun, blending the Hebrew Hag Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, a Jewish harvest holiday, bringing in themes of bounty and tradition with Erev Hag, meaning the eve of a holiday. And then it throws in the old English ballad Chevy Chase, which recounts a border skirmish medieval conflict. So in just one phrase, Joyce infuses this peaceful garden scene with religious solemnity, harvest imagery, and echoes of historical conflict. It's a really quick, almost subliminal way of saying this character, this HCE, he's a tapestry woven from absolutely everything. Faith, nature, human strife, the lot.
That's incredible. It really is like he's packing entire cultural histories into single phrases. And the royal procession itself, it's a comedic masterpiece, isn't it? A leisure-loving dog fox followed at walking pace by a lady pack of cocker spaniels, which famously don't hunt foxes. It just sets up the king's faulty perception right from the very beginning. And HCE's attire, that jumble of two-piece surcingle, solo scarf, and plaid, plus fours, puttees, and bulldog boots, makes him appear both kind of dignified and utterly absurdly overdressed, like a caricature of some colonial figure.
Absolutely. The whole scene is visually absurd, and it perfectly prefigures the central misunderstanding that's about to happen. And that crucial detail in HCE's hand at the flower pot on a pole. It's not just any old flower pot. It's specifically an earwig trap. Its inverted, sort of bell-shaped form on a stick resembles a big mushroom, and it's designed specifically to catch those little insects. And that phrase, earthside hoist with care, it's such a playful twist on packaging instructions, adding to the lighthearted absurdity, but maybe also hinting at something precious yet prone to damage being elevated. It's a mundane item given this almost ceremonial presence.
So the stage is perfectly set now for this profound yet utterly farcical miscommunication. The king, who was, or often feigned to be, noticeably long-sighted from green youth, which implies he either couldn't see well or maybe just pretended not to, mistakes this peculiar earwig trap for a fishing rod. He confuses it with lobster trapping. So he asks if paternoster and silver doctors, which are actual fishing baits, are now more fancied bait. An HCE described as honest, blunt Hermfield replies in this thick Hiberno-English accent, which Joyce renders phonetically as, "Now your maggers all worts a cotchin on thom bluggy earwuggers." Meanwhile, the Sailor King, who is draining a guglet of obvious Adamel, which could be water, but Joyce layers it with hints of something stronger, maybe even gift, meaning poison in German, just smiles beneath his walrus mustaches. So in this glorious moment, a simple bloody earwigs gets twisted into an entire name. What's really remarkable here is how Joyce uses this specific mundane linguistic accident to lay the foundation for a universal truth, that all our identities, public and private, aren't solid facts. They're fluid narratives, constantly shaped by misperception and the sheer artistry, or perhaps clumsiness, of language itself. It's a profound commentary on the very nature of storytelling, really. disguised as a simple joke.
It truly is. And that moment raises an essential question, doesn't it? Is it the turnpike keeper's thick accent? Or is it the king's impaired hearing and vision that turns earwigs into earwiggers and ultimately earwickers? The king's long-sightedness, or maybe his feigned poor vision and his possible muzziness from that Adam's ale, which, as you noted, could be just water, but also carries these allusions to something stronger or even harmful, are crucial to this misperception. He apparently even mistakes a potholed causeway for something else, suggesting a kind of royal detachment from common reality, a general degree of impairment, perhaps. HCE's phonetic dialect, "Nah, your mangers, oh, we're just cotchin' on thon, bluggy earwuggers," grounds him firmly in Irish vernacular. It creates this humorous yet really revealing contrast with the king's formal inquiry. So this moment of miscommunication, with earwigs being misheard and mispronounced, is absolutely central to his naming. The name Earwicker is born from this exploit, becoming his occupational agnomen, basically, his professional nickname or distinguishing title. Before this, he was likely known simply as porter, reflecting his occupation as a turnpike keeper. And the word wicker itself cleverly echoes wicket, like a small gate or door, a turnpike gate. So Earwicker becomes this clever reshuffling of his likely prior occupational name, just demonstrating Joyce's incredible linguistic agility.
Right. So the king, already established as a bit of a character with his walrus stash, and maybe even a touch of hereditary deafness, which is subtly suggested by his hereditary white lock, that patch of white hair sometimes associated with deafness. He makes this big, rather snobbish pronouncement. And this king, he's a composite figure, isn't he? Blending British royalty like William IV, Edward III, George V, and even the Norman conquerors, William I and II. Sometimes Joyce even calls him William the Conk, supposedly for his prominent nose. He turns to two of his retinue of gallowglasses. And for anyone listening, gallowglasses were essentially heavily armed mercenary foot soldiers. So not just any guards, but a historically loaded type of bodyguard. These two are initially named Michael, Lord of Leeks and Offaly, and Elcock, the Jubilee Mayor of Drogheda. Although a later version apparently names them as Michael M. Manning and Jubilee, an Italian excellency, cited by the learned Scotch Canavan of Canmacanoise, a playful nod to the famous Irish monastic settlement Clonmacnoise. This group, ironically, is presented as a triptychal religious family, symbolizing puritas of doctrina, business per usuals, and the perchy patch of Hamlock. A totally satirical image of religious and civic authority all rolled into one. And then the king remarks on HCE with this rather cutting observation. Holy bones of Saint Hubert, how our red brother of Porngrania would audibly fume did he know that we have, for Christy Bailiwick, a turnpiker, who is by turns a pike bailer no seldomer than an earwigger. He even connects HCE to John Pill, a distortion of John Peel, the famous hunter from the song. What's the deeper purpose behind portraying the king this way? And how does this sort of royal seal of ridicule further cement HCE's new identity?
Well, it's crucial for understanding how public identity is forged, isn't it? The king's physical traits, the walrus mustache, that hereditary white forelock and short-fingeredness, which, as you say, could be a playful jab at Prime Minister Gladstone's lost finger, or maybe a reference to Sokie Lyons, a famous burglaress, all add to his eccentricity. They paint him as this flawed, somewhat comical royal figure. That white forelock in particular, potentially indicating hereditary deafness, reinforces the idea that the king's hearing might genuinely be impaired, compounding that initial earwugger's misunderstanding. It adds a layer of plausibility to the farce. His entourage, these gallowglasses, and the references to Irish counties like Lex and Offaly and places like Drogheda, root this seemingly fantastical encounter deeply in Irish history and its complex, often quite fraught relationship with British rule. Joyce is absolutely satirizing both the Irish and their colonial overseers here, showing how authority figures, even in their flaws, really shape public perception. The king's remark itself is a double-edged sword. Pouring Grania cleverly merges Pomerania, a German province, pouring rain, evoking classic Irish weather, and pouring grain, linking perhaps to HCE's potential role as a publican. It links HCE to a broader European context while firmly grounding him in local realities. And John Pill, yes, it's another misidentification by the king, whose vision and judgment are clearly impaired, maybe by drink, maybe just by his nature. He sees HCE as a fellow hunter, further reinforcing his unreliable perspective. So HCE's identity isn't just born, it's immediately ridiculed and framed by the very institutions of power, however flawed those institutions might be.
Okay, so after laying out this elaborate, somewhat farcical origin story for HCE, Joyce then pulls back the curtain. He almost directly addresses us, the reader, asking, essentially, okay, are these really the facts, or is this just a good story? The narrative pauses to question its own truthfulness, its own veracity, with this wonderfully poetic yet questioning little interlude. One still hears that pebble-crusted laughter, chappy-chap, cheery sharily, among the roadside tree the Lady Patrick planted, and still one feels the emossive silence of the clad stone illegibiling. I have knees outside born. It's beautiful, but also unsettling. Then comes the direct challenge. Comes the question, are these the facts of his nominogentalization as recorded and accoladed in both or either of the collateral anthropomorphic narratives? Are those their fata, which we read in Sibylline between the Fas and its Nephis? No dung on the road, and shall no Homaya be our place like, Ye Malaki our King Little Khan? He's making us, the reader, pause and consider the very nature of truth itself. It's a really stark reminder that even the most authenticated versions are still, well, just stories that morph and change over time. What is Joyce truly asking us to consider here about history and literature?
Well, this is one of Joyce's most profound meta-narrative moments, I think. He's explicitly challenging us to read between the Fas and its nefas, that is, between divine law and impious crime, between what's right and wrong, essentially, between the lines. He wants us to recognize that facts are often incredibly malleable, especially when they're passed through oral tradition or filtered through different perspectives. It's much like a literary game of telephone, isn't it? Joyce coins this term nominogentalization. It's a brilliant neologism combining nomen gentle, meaning a traditional family or clan name, with accolade, that's ceremonial recognition. So he's simultaneously creating a new name and giving it this kind of mock official stamp, while at the very same time questioning its validity. It's quite clever. The blending of Christian apostles with a common Irish surname in anthropomorphic makes light of these grand religious and historical narratives. It suggests an anthropomorphic element where human stories kind of become divine over time. And those classical references to fata, fates, Sibylline, prophecy, and fas and nefas further underscore the constructed nature of truth and the absolute necessity for critical reading.
Right. And those interjections like, no dung on the road, and shall no Homaya be our place, they're so jarring, aren't they? Almost crude, yet they seem to ground this philosophical inquiry in a very Irish, very earthy reality.
Precisely. No dung on the road is a crude, dismissive question, just mocking certainty. It's like a local version of no shit, or really. It throws us right back to the mundane, practical world. While Nehemiah, playing with Nehemiah, the rebuilder of Jerusalem, and maybe Bohemia, a place of artistic freedom, and Mulaki, our kingable Khan, referencing Malachy, an Irish high king, and Khan for king, with that spoonerism echo of conquering kings, they question who truly rules and what really constitutes a home or a kingdom. Son of Hokmah, Hebrew for wisdom, suggests we should be seeking truth amidst all this ambiguity. And that powerful metaphor, man is mountain and unto changeth doth one ascend, suggests HCE's monumental, enduring nature, but also his slow, almost geological transformation. It implies a process of arduous discovery or maybe even spiritual ascent for the reader trying to understand him. Even cunical as Finnegan, linking the Punic and Phoenician people, which are actually two words for the same group, emphasizes how things that seem distinct can be the same, and how intricate details can just be fussy, finicky, perhaps like Finnegan himself. And this section even introduces the inseparable sisters, uncontrollable night talkers, Skritsidaisde, with Donya Zad, that's Shahrazad and Dunyazad from 1001 Nights. They're presented as an alternative, though ultimately dismissed, source for the story. This highlights the power of female narrative and that recurring night talker's motif, the idea that stories are told and retold in the dark, constantly evolving. They are seen as kind of declining in status, becoming mere amusers or pantomime actresses, suggesting how grand tales can be trivialized over time. So Joyce is really showing us that stories, much like truth, are not fixed. They are constantly being told, retold, challenged, and reshaped. It's an incredible lesson in narrative deconstruction right there in the text.
Okay, but the Earwicker story, however questionable its origins, somehow it's solidified. It's stuck. And HCE's identity then expands way beyond just that one peculiar encounter with the king. It seems to evolve into something far more universal, almost archetypal. Joyce tells us that despite the questionable origin, the great fact emerges that after that historic date, all holographs so far exhumed, initialed by Humphrey, bear the sigla HCE. So while he was only and long and always good Duke Humphrey for the hunger lean spalpeens of Luke-Lizod, referring to the poor landless laborers of Chapelizod, a real Dublin village, and just chimbers to his cronies, the wider populace apparently gave him, as sense of those normative letters, the nickname, Here Comes Everybody. It's almost like he became a brand, you know, an abbreviation that, paradoxically, means everyone. What's truly remarkable here is how Joyce takes this specific individual and, just through this linguistic transformation, makes him embody the collective human experience.
That really is the profound aha moment of this section, isn't it? His name itself becomes this container, It embodies the very essence of the book, this melting pot of identities, histories, and mythologies. Here Comes Everybody transforms HCE from just an individual into this universal archetypal figure representing, well, all humanity. It specifically echoes Hugh Culling Eardley Childers, a historical figure known for his considerable girth, which adds another layer of physical universality, perhaps. His name becomes a vessel for collective human experience, and he maintains this dual identity. He's Good Duke Humphrey, referencing that old saying, dine with good Duke Humphrey, which ironically means to go hungry, a really apt title for the poor spalpeens or landless laborers of Lucan Chapelizet who would know him, and he's Chimbers from Chimpton for his close friends. But to the wider public, he is the monumental HCE. This just clearly highlights the multifaceted nature of reputation and identity across different social strata. And that paradoxical phrase, constantly the same as and equal to himself, suggests both an unwavering consistency and, at the same time, the capacity to encompass all possibilities. It highlights his identity as this universal, ever-present figure who contains multitudes within that single initialism. The nominagentalization process, as we discussed earlier, results in a figure who is both deeply Irish and profoundly universally human. That's a central paradox right at the heart of the wake.
Right, so he's not just everybody. He's everybody performing on a stage, observing his own myth being played out. It's almost like a celebrity watching the premiere of his own biopic. Joyce brilliantly depicts HCE surveying a truly Catholic assemblage gathered together in that King's Treat house of satin lustre-like, a theater, quite possibly the Gaiety in Dublin, which was a real hub of public entertainment. He's there at a command performance by special request of the problem passion play of the millennium, running strong since creation, A Royal Divorce. The audience, drawn from asphalt velds and ox gangs, juxtaposing modern asphalt fields with old land measures, really encompassing all walks of life, unanimously clap-applaud Mr. Wallenstein, Washington Semper-Kelly's Green tourers. And H.E. himself sits in his Vice-Regal booth, a nod perhaps to the Viceroy's residence, a seat of colonial power, but also maybe an echo of John Wilkes Booth, the assassin, which adds a darker historical layer. He's described as a veritable Napoleon the Nth, a practical joke piece and a retired Celtic comedian, a Celtic comedian. He wears an invariable broad-stretched kerchief, cooling his whole neck, and a wardrobe-paneled tuxedo completely thrown back from a shirt well entitled The Swallow Wall, on every point, far outstarching the laundered clawhammers and marble-topped highboys of the pit stalls and early amphitheater. He's dressed to impress. He is, however, depicted as less eminent than the ritual hoods of McCabe and Cullen, these being prominent Irish cardinals, positioning him just slightly below the highest religious authority in Dublin. The entire scene is just saturated with theatrical terms. The piece was this. Look at the lamps. The cast was thus. See end of the clock. Ladies circle. Cloaks may be left. Pit, promer and parterre, standing room only. Habituals conspicuously emergent. It's like an entire universe compressed into a single theater scene.
It really is a masterclass in Joyce's recurring theme of life as performance. HCE's identity is far from static here. It's a role constantly being enacted and reinterpreted for this Catholic assemblage, this universal audience that spans all social classes and experiences. And A Royal Divorce, that play, it was a very real and incredibly popular melodrama about Napoleon's divorce from Josephine. It was often touted as the most successful historical play of the century. Its incredibly long run, described as running strong since creation, makes it both humdrum, mundane, familiar from repetition, and enlivened, always seeming fresh. It perfectly reflects the cyclical nature of popular entertainment and history itself. This directly links HCE's personal story to these grand historical and theatrical narratives, famously including apparently a dramatic rendition of the Battle of Waterloo within the play. And the touring company itself, Mr. Wallenstein, Washington Semper-Kelly's Green tourers, is such a rich blend of historical figures and cultural references. You have Wallenstein, the 17th century Bohemian soldier, Washington, representing American identity, and then Kelly, a common Irish surname, alongside evergreen permanence, which might allude to W. Kelly's actual touring company that existed at the time. This gently mocks the commercialization and global reach of history and entertainment, suggesting that even our grand narratives just become consumable spectacle. HCE, as Napoleon the Nth, exaggerates his imperial, all-encompassing nature like Napoleon to the nth degree, suggesting he contains endless versions of powerful figures. But it also hints at imposture, or maybe a diminished status, much like Napoleon III, who was sometimes considered a mountebank or a trickster. He's simultaneously a folk's forefather, a popular author or progenitor figure, and a practical joke piece blending grandeur with satire perfectly.
And his attire at the theater, it's almost a performance in itself, isn't it? That elaborate description.
Absolutely. His impeccably laundered swallow-all, that's a swallowtail coat shirt and tuxedo, which is far outstarching those of the clawhammers, a Dublin slang term for dolts, or maybe just the tailcoats worn by lower-class patrons, and marble-topped highboys, another term for blockheads. In the pit stalls, the medium-priced seats, usually for regular workers, profoundly signify his class superiority. He is meant to embody everybody, yet he conspicuously stands above him in his sartorial splendor. It's a contradiction. His position in the Vice-Regal booth makes him both observer and observed, a symbol of authority, but also a figure on display for everyone else. And his status is described as only slightly less exalted than Cardinals Cullen and McCabe, who were prominent Irish Catholic figures. This highlights his kind of local head of state status within a religious context. It's a truly complex portrait of a public figure, simultaneously universal, historical, theatrical, and deeply rooted in the social hierarchies of Dublin at the time.
You know, it really makes you think about how we consume news and drama today. Are many public figures essentially performing for us? Isn't their story constantly being retold and exaggerated in the media? This is Joyce, way ahead of his time, showing us the mechanics behind that whole process. The way a public persona is crafted, presented, and consumed as spectacle. We're just as much a part of the audience in HCE's theater as those Asball, Velt, and Offsgangs he mentions. #3, rumors, scandal, and defense. Pages 33-36. But as we all know, with great public figures often come great public scandals. And HCE, our universal man, is certainly no exception. This deep dive into pages 33-36 really shows us how his reputation is relentlessly picked apart by gossip, by innuendo, and even by these mock legal defenses. It reveals the dark underbelly of public life. So after his rise to this almost mythic theatrical status, the whispers begin. They take the dignified HCE and start turning him into something vile. The text notes that a baser meaning has been read into these characters, the literal sense of which decency can safely scarcely hint. Wow. It has been blurtlingly brooded by certain wisecrackers that he suffered from a vile disease, asthma, unmannered them, and flattering. The narrative then defensively states that such suggestions ought not to be, and one should like to hope to be able to add, ought not to be allowed to be made. Very protective. But the detractors, described as an imperfectly warm-blooded race, portray him as great white caterpillar capable of any and every enormity in the calendar recorded to the discredit of the Juke and Kellickek families. I mean, it's the ultimate character assassination, isn't it? A swift and brutal fall from grace, almost.
It truly is, and what's fascinating here is how Joyce uses these baser meanings to expose the profound fragility of reputation. This immediately highlights that universal theme of how quickly public opinion can turn, often based on completely insubstantial rumors and malicious interpretations. It reduces a complex figure to this grotesque caricature. The vile disease is a particularly potent accusation. Historically, syphilis was often linked to moral judgment and sexual transgression, making it a powerful, shaming accusation that attacks not just physical health, but also social standing and character. And Joyce, with his characteristic blend of humor and disdain, gives us athma, unmanner them, that humorous corruption of asthma that sounds like a mock, indignant rebuke to the gossipers. It's like saying, stop your gasping, ill-mannered accusations. The image of a great white caterpillar, this disgusting, creeping creature, contrasts so sharply with his earlier Christ-likeness and clean-minded giant persona. It vividly illustrates how scandal can just warp public perception and reduce a figure to something contemptible in the public eye.
And the accusations just get more absurd, almost comical, yet they seem to cling to him. From a vile disease to annoying Welsh fusiliers. His detractors apparently insinuated that HCE lay at one time under the ludicrous imputation of annoying Welsh fusiliers in the People's Park. This accusation is met with these dismissive sounds. Hey, 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 hock, hock, hock. Fawn and Flora on the lee, love that little old jock. Like laughter. The idea of the Christ-likeness of the big, clean-minded giant H.C. Earwicker being a lust-sleuth nosing for trouble in a booby trap is deemed preposterous. Yet, and this is the really crucial part, truth, Beard on Prophet compels one to add that there is said to have been quondam, some case of the kind implicating it is interdem believed, a quidam, if he did not exist it would be necessary quonium to invent him, about that time stumbling around dumbballing in leaky sneakers with his Tark record. It's almost comical how these accusations pile up, but even as they're dismissed with laughter and those onomatopoeic fruit sounds, they linger, don't they? They just stick.
Precisely. This section highlights how even the most ridiculous allegations can gain traction, especially when they're cloaked in moral panic and innuendo. The specific accusation implying impropriety with military figures, Welsh fusiliers, in a public setting, likely Phoenix Park in Dublin, is both absurd and sexually suggestive. It plays right into anxieties about public morality and social transgression. The laughter and dismissals are an attempt to brush it off as a joke, but the very mention keeps the rumor alive and hints at some underlying truth or at least a persistent suspicion. Joyce is showing how dismissing a rumor can sometimes inadvertently amplify it. That phrase, truth, beard on profit, compels one to add, ironically introduces the possibility of truth, deliberately maintaining ambiguity. It's almost a mock scholarly confession of a potential scandal, pretending to be rigorous while spreading gossip. And the introduction of the quidem, this vague certain person or someone who is stambling around Dumballing in leaky sneakers, stumbling around Dublin in shabby shoes, implying moral decay or a disreputable character, subtly shifts the blame. But it still acknowledges that something might have happened. This reinforces the slipperiness of truth and how public narratives are always looking for a scapegoat, or at least a plausible, if vague, culprit. Joyce's use of Latin phrases like quondam, formerly, and interdum, sometimes, lends this mock scholarly, pseudo-legal air to the gossip, further blurring the lines between serious inquiry and just idle rumor. It suggests that even academic language can be twisted to legitimize mere whispers.
Right, so how much of the truth are we actually getting here? And how much is fabricated, exaggerated, or deliberately obscured by euphemism and these conflicting accounts? Joyce masterfully uses this mock-legalese to highlight the performative nature of guilt and innocence. It suggests that the facts are often less important than the narrative itself. The core allegation here is that H.E. behaved with gentlemsky modus office a pair of dainty maidservants in the swolf of the rushy hollow, unquote. H.C. is described as topantically anonymous, but let us hew him Abdullah Gemelag-Zarsky, given this dramatic, exoticized alias, and posted at Malins by watch warriors of the Vigilance Committee. So he's under surveillance. A witness apparently cries, "Lo, you blondie liar, God seen you in the narked place, and she what eateth our home defileth these boils." Real Dublin street talk there. The maidservants claim Dame Nature in all innocency had spontaneously, in about the same hour of the eventide, sent them both. A convenient excuse. Their published Silken Lane testimonies are, where not dubiously pure, visibly divergent, as wapped from wept on minor points touching the intimate nature of this, a first defense in vert or venison, which was admittedly an incautious, but, at its wildest, a partial exposure with such attenuating circumstances. Garthen gaddeth green, where Soakman brideth curling, as an abnormal St. Swithin's summer, and just as Rosa Sharon, a ripe occasion to provoke it. It reads almost like a legal brief, but for a public scandal, full of excuses and contradictions.
It's a satirical legal brief, absolutely. This is the most detailed incident of indecency we get, yet it's heavily shrouded in euphemism and mock-legalese. It deliberately obscures the facts while drawing maximum attention to the scandal itself. Ungentlemensky imodus, ungentlemanly immodesty, is such a comically formal description for alleged sexual misconduct. It highlights the absurd attempts to dignify sordid details. The rushy hollow is a classic setting, secluded, natural, highly suggestive of illicit encounters, or maybe just where the women were relieving themselves, which adds another layer. HCE, initially anonymous, is quickly given that dramatic, exoticized alias and put under surveillance by a vigilance committee, reflecting the moral policing and the public's insatiable fascination with scandal back then. "Gob seen you in the narked place," that Irish slang for mouth saw you in the marked place, grounds it in local Dublin speech, making it feel intimately whispered like real gossip. The maidservants' conflicting testimonies, described as visibly divergent, as wapped from wept, conflicting like tears versus laughter, highlight the notoriously unreliable nature of evidence, especially in cases of public scandal. It shows how narratives are shaped by subjective experience and perhaps even by coercion or suggestion. And the phrase first defense in vert or venison is brilliant. It's a legal phrase used for hunting crimes, poaching, but here it's metaphorically applied to sexual misconduct. It frames HCE's actions as a kind of moral hunt and a violation of social norms, a trespass against public decency. The partial exposure is classic Joycean sexual innuendo. It subtly confirms the suggestive nature of the event while maintaining plausible deniability, playing right into body humor. And the attenuating circumstances, those humorous excuses like an abnormal St. Swithin's summer, suggesting a hot, tempting season associated with rain and bad weather, ironically, and a ripe occasion, are priceless. They imply inevitability rather than fault, almost blaming Dame Nature itself, reducing personal responsibility and painting this picture of a world conspiring to create scandal. It's a profound commentary on how we rationalize and spin public apologies, even today.
It's a masterclass in rumor control, isn't it? deflecting, distorting, blaming Dame Nature and the abnormal St. Swithin's summer, doing everything possible to defend a reputation, however stained it might be. You can almost see the public relations machine working centuries before PR was even a thing. So amidst all this swirling accusation and gossip, HCE goes full dramatic. He denies everything and even tries to leverage his status and his British to my backbone tongue to clear his name. It really is a performance worthy of the stage he was just surveying. The text notes the inevitability of sexual attraction, with we can't do without them. Wives rush to the rescuers. Often will toman while led is the lull, meaning man will woo woman while loud is the laugh. This playful distortion suggesting the inevitability of human desire and the folly of moral policing. HCE is declared guiltless of much laid to him, with still a trace of his erstwhile brow. His accent still gives him away a little. He emphatically denies the hocus pocus accusation, made by a creature in human form who is quite beneath par and several degrees lower than your triple-hydrid snake. That's the biblical serpent from Genesis, representing temptation and betrayal. Strong language. HCE, described now as a flaxen gigas, a giant from mythology, tapped his chronometrum drum, his watch, and now standing full erect above the adjacent floodplain, scene of its happening, with a Berlin gauntlet chop stuck in the huff of his elbows, points at an angle of 32 degrees toward his Duke de Fair's overgrown milestone, which is the Duke of Wellington's monument in Phoenix Park. Very specific. He then declares with solemn emotions fire, "Me only them 5 ones, he is equal combat. I have won straight, hence my no nationwide hotel and creamery establishments." He links his innocence to his success. He makes this solemn oath upon the monument, upon the open Bible, and before the great taskmasters, and in the presence of the deity itself, the well of Bishop and Mrs. Mikan of High Church of England. As of all such have said my immediate with-dwellers, and of every living soul in every corner wheresoever of this globe in general, which useth of my British to my backbone tongue, and commutative justice, that there is not one tittle of truth in that purest of fib fabrications. Wow. This isn't just a denial. It's an epic theatrical performance of innocence, invoking everything he possibly can.
It truly is an epic performance, capturing the very essence of how individuals, especially public figures, navigate scandal. It's a remarkable blend of, well, legal defense, religious invocation, and just sheer theatrical bluster. The underlying theme here is that constant tension between personal truth and public perception, and how one must meticulously perform innocence even when doubt lingers and the truth remains stubbornly ambiguous, perhaps unknowable. HCE's flaxen gigas persona, standing full erect, projects authority and virility even in his denial. His defiant posture, dramatically tapping his chronometrum drum, his watch, and the Berlin gauntlet chop stuck in the hove of his elbow, a military glove tucked into his elbow, are all part of this elaborate performative defense. He is quite literally posturing for public opinion. His gesture towards the Wellington Monument in Phoenix Park, Duke de Fair's overgrown milestone, is deeply symbolic, isn't it? This monument represents enduring power, the colonial presence, and a complex connection to Irish history, all of which HCE leverages in his defense. He's aligning himself with established authority and the very landscape of Dublin. His dramatic, quasi-legal oath, invoking the Bible, God, great taskmasters, and even local religious figures, Bishop and Mrs. Mikan of the High Church of England, is an exaggerated performance of innocence, designed to sway public opinion and invoke divine sanction. He claims victory, I have won straight, and strategically links his material success, my no nationwide hotel and creamery establishments, to his moral standing. It subtly conflates wealth with virtue, which is a common rhetorical trick even today, right? His proud declaration of speaking British to my backbone tongue further reinforces the colonial imposition of English language and culture in Ireland. He aligns himself with the dominant power, even as he is supposedly Duke Humphrey to the Irish poor. This shows how individuals adapt and use the prevailing power structures to their advantage in complex ways. And finally, fib fabrications. It's such a playful, alliterative term for lies. It undermines the seriousness of the accusations while cleverly acknowledging their existence and the pervasive nature of gossip. It's just a dazzling display of rhetorical acrobatics, really. #4. The Cad's encounter and the spread of gossip. Pages 35.
But the story of HCE's reputation, it just keeps unraveling. It doesn't stop with formal accusations and dramatic denials. It continues through the everyday channels of gossip and rumor, often initiated by seemingly innocuous encounters. This section truly shows the widespread, almost insidious reach of his story. We learn that the story itself is an amalgam as absorbing as calcium chlorides and hydrophobic sponges can make it. like this blend of fact, fiction, and chemical reactions, emphasizing its fluid, fabricated nature, constantly absorbing new elements. HCE, now called the tried friend of all creation, is depicted billowing across the wide expanse of our greatest park. That's Phoenix Park, Dublin again, a real and iconic location where private indiscretions often become public knowledge. One happy go-gusty Ides of April morning. And this date is described as the anniversary of his first assumption of his birthday suit and writes in appurtenance to the confusioning of human races, suddenly hinting at vulnerability and scandal, maybe a personal rebirth into public scrutiny. He's clad in this really strange assortment of attire, including a caoutchouc kepi, Blaufunksfistchen, Ironsides jackboots, and rubberized Inverness. A truly outlandish, almost grotesque ensemble. Very visible. He meets a cad with a pipe, described as the luciferant, not the aureolate, suggesting this cad is a bringer of light, truth or exposure maybe, rather than some golden pure figure. The cad hardly accosted him with Guinness thaw tool and Jumy dinner ouzelfen, a garbled Hiberno-English phrase that roughly translates apparently to, "How are you today, my decent man?" And then ask HC for the time. I mean, a simple, "How are you?" and "What time is it?" becomes this deeply convoluted, almost dangerous exchange. Only in Joyce, right? Can something so mundane ignite such a fuse?
It's an extraordinary sequence, precisely because a seemingly innocent exchange becomes this pivotal moment for HCE's deep-seated anxieties to just surface. It links this mundane encounter to the larger themes of guilt and public scrutiny that are always swirling around him. And this entire scene is apparently taking place on what's hinted to be Chaos St. Patrick's Day. St. Patrick's Day, grounding the absurdity in a specific, culturally resonant Irish context. The amalgam description emphasizes the story's fluid, fabricated nature, constantly absorbing new elements like some kind of chemical reaction. Phoenix Park itself, as you noted, is a real iconic Dublin location, grounding the myth in a very specific public space where private indiscretions inevitably become public knowledge. The Ides of April carries that classical allusion to betrayal, like the Ides of March in Julius Caesar's assassination, mixed with mirthday suits, suggesting nakedness or a birthday suit, hinting at vulnerability, scandal, and maybe a personal rebirth into public scrutiny. HCE's outlandish, rubberized clothing suggests both preparedness for Ireland's unpredictable weather and also a slightly grotesque, almost childish figure. He seems dressed for some exaggerated adventure. The cad's garbled Hiberno-English phrase, barely recognizable as "How are you today, my decent man?" and then highlights miscommunication again, and the rich colloquial nature of Dublin street life. The mention of Guinness subtly links the encounter to Irish culture and possibly alcohol. And the seemingly innocent time inquiry becomes loaded with symbolic weight. It could represent fate, judgment, or just the cyclical nature of events in Finnegans' wake. It's a quick, sharp spark that lights a very long fuse of gossip.
And HCE's response to the seemingly simple question about the time. He's suddenly weighing life and death, necessity and noxiousness, all over a time check. It's both a completely absurd and incredibly human, isn't it? His internal monologue reveals this lightning-fast calculation. Hesitancy was clearly to be evitated. Execration as cleverly to be honest-oid. He's thinking strategically. He realizes on fundamental liberal principles the supreme importance, nexally and noxally, of physical life, that is, the necessity and noxiousness of survival, because he's unwishful of being hurled into eternity right then, plugged by a soft-nosed bullet from the sap. This reveals his primal fear and his very pragmatic desire to avoid confrontation or violence, specifically being hurled into eternity. It possibly references the Fenian Rising and the political tensions that were a constant undercurrent in Irish life back then. So he halts, quick on the draw, and produces his Jurgensen Shrapnel Waterbury, a robust, perhaps even military-grade watch. He then tells the inquiring Kidder, while hearing the skirling of harsh Mother East old Fox Goodman, the bellmaster, at work upon the 10-ton, tonuant thunderous tenor taller in the speckled church, that it's 12 of 'em sidereal and tankard time. He adds this while bending deeply with smoked sardinish breath to give pondus to the copper stick he presented, this ambiguous gift that could be a coin, a bribe, a cane, a symbol of authority, or even a phallic image, adding layers of sexual innuendo and appeasement, and all delivered with smoked sardinish breath. He also refers to using stuck ginger as cha-cha for bone, muscle, blood, flesh, and vimvidol, a folk remedy described with visceral detail, suggesting his need for inner strength and resilience against these external threats.
Indeed. This internal struggle is such profound insight into HCE as a figure caught between primal fear and intellectual rationalization. His rapid, almost legalistic internal monologue, nexally and noxally, reveals this pragmatic desire for self-preservation, specifically to avoid violence. The layering of cosmic time, 12 of them sidereal, referring to astronomical time on a grand scale with the colloquial tankard time or pub drinking time, once again unites the sublime and the ordinary. It perhaps indicates both a moment of divine judgment and maybe just an urge to seek solace in drink. The thunderous tenor taller of the church bell reinforces this sense of fateful timing, doesn't it? A booming reminder of the consequences of his actions, maybe. The copper stick is deliberately ambiguous. Its triple meaning coin, cane, phallus, serves to complicate his actions. It suggests this blend of calculated self-preservation, veiled generosity, and perhaps an underlying shame or self-consciousness, all wrapped in that subtle sexual innuendo. And stuck ginger, that folk remedy, grounds HC's character in a very sensory reality. It suggests his desperate need for inner strength and vitality against the crushing weight of public scrutiny and his own anxieties. This entire response is like a microdrama of human calculation under pressure.
Okay, so HECE navigates this seemingly innocuous encounter, but the cad, now given the name Gaping Gill, a truly evocative name, suggesting a mouth just eager to spread stories, or, alternatively, Mr. Shalasai Shalfloff, personifying those dual public responses of sorrow or ridicule, after receiving guilders, Dutch currency, perhaps a bribe, and the time of day, immediately goes about spreading his version of the encounter. This is where the telephone game of gossip really kicks into high gear. The cad recounts HCE's markedly post-puberal hyperpituitary type of Heidelberg man-like cavern ethics, which is a truly bizarre pseudoscientific description of HCE as this hypermasculine caveman-like figure. Just pure mockery. He delivers HCE's big-timers verbatim words, no, not verbatim, but verbatim, distorted verbatim words, with soft-tongued pocky talk, sly, deceptive speech. All while he's studying castels in the Blown and studying cowshots over the Noran, juxtaposing grand aspirations, castles in the air, with mundane, earthy reality, cow droppings, and spitting Irish saliva. He apparently dines on peach bombay, a fancy dish, or maybe just a distortion of something simpler, and makes playful allusions to Two Worm Early. And he's described as a respectable, prominently connected fellow of Iro-European ascendances, yet his manners are questioned. The cad, playing the part of a snorler or storyteller, takes HCE's words and twists them into something scandalous, adding his own peculiar flavor, almost like a malicious artist painting a distorted portrait.
Yes, this section brilliantly illustrates the transition from an immediate encounter to a burgeoning, uncontrollable scandal. Gaping Gill becomes the primary conduit for spreading the aftertale, the distorted story of the incident. His identity as Mr. Shawasai, or Mr. Shawaloff, perfectly encapsulates the dual public response to HCE people are either saddened by his fall or find him ridiculous, laughing at his expense. The distortion of truth is central to the cad's narrative. Verbatim words highlights the unreliability of memory and oral transmission, showing how facts are reshaped in the telling. The cad's soft-tongued pocky talk implies sly, deceptive speech, further muddying the truth and adding this layer of cunning to the spreading of rumor. The pseudoscientific description of HCE's Heidelberg man-like cavern ethics is a hilarious piece of mockery, linking him to primal, grotesque masculinity and German academic elitism. It suggests a kind of scholarly attempt to pathologize his perceived flaws. And the two worm and early phrase, that twist on early bird catches the worm with clear sexual undertones, shows how gossip weaponizes language and twists perceived flaws into salacious innuendo. The cade's Irish saliva and the questioning of his callous fashion of expectoration mock Irish manners and social class pretensions, subtly revealing the snobbery often inherent in gossip. And the fact that the cade is a respectable, prominently connected fellow of Iro-European ascendances is a crucial detail, isn't it? It highlights the widespread nature of gossip, transcending social classes from the elite right down to the street, making HCE's scandal truly pervasive. This narrative, enriched by Hiberno-English and subtle sexual innuendo, becomes a powerful force in shaping HCE's public identity.
So incredibly, even the confessional, a place meant for ultimate trust and privacy, isn't safe from the spread of HCE's scandal. It's such a biting critique of moral authority and how quickly sacred vows can be broken, isn't it? ALP, Anna Livia Pluribel, HCE's wife, described with great pathos as our cad's bit of strife, nee Berenice Maxwellton. And having a quick ear for spittoons, a wondrously gritty detail, implying she's always listening for gossip in public places, tries to confide in her particular reverend director, whom she had been meaning primarily speak. That's Mr. Brown, a Jesuit priest. She hopes the gospel, that brilliant Joycean blend of gospel and gossip, so delivered, would go no further than his Jesuit's cloth. She's trying damage control. She does this with coupled lips and Annie Laurie promises, in a state of extreme nervousness, her eyes dry, small speech ticklish. You feel for her. However, this overspoiled priest, Mr. Brown, disguises of Vincentian, is overheard in his secondary personality as a Nolan and underreared pole soul by accident. To pianissimi, a slightly varied version of Crooked Rib's Confidentials, a slip of the tongue, supposedly. This whispered secret, then, hushly pierced the ruby and durellum of one Philly Thurston, a lay teacher of rural science. The information spreads. And the phrase, in vinars venitas volatiles velatotum, a distortion of in vino veritas, meaning truth in wine, is invoked. It implies gossip spreads with drink, and volatiles velatotum suggests it spreads like a volatile, rapidly moving disease. It's just a profound betrayal of trust.
It absolutely is a profound betrayal, and it raises important questions about institutional corruption and the power of human nature to subvert even sacred vows. ALP's desperate attempt to contain the narrative by confessing to a priest really highlights the immense social pressure on women in that era and their reliance on religious authority in a conservative society. The priest, Mr. Brown, becomes a key vector for the gossip spread, demonstrating that even those meant to uphold moral order are susceptible to the allure of scandal, or maybe just carelessness. His secondary personality as a Nolan suggests this hidden, less scrupulous side, a duplicity that undermines his sacred role. And the connection to Hegesippus, an early Christian historian known for documenting heresies, satirically links religious authority with the spread of heresies, in this case, gossip being the heresy. He is overheard as if by accident, but this accident is crucial for the plot's progression. It's a seemingly innocuous detail that unleashes further narrative chaos. The terms gossipal, gospel gossip, and epistoliar are brilliant Joycian neologisms, aren't they? They highlight how sacred narratives and intimate confessions become fodder for public talk, and how official records can morph into informal stories. The gossip is described as being buried teetostally in their Irish stew, vividly indicating its deep integration into everyday conversation and meals. It becomes part of the mundane fabric of Irish life. In vinas venitas volatiles velatotum is a highly suggestive distortion. It implies that secrets spill when drinking, and that gossip spreads like a volatile, rapidly moving disease, infecting everyone it touches. And hushly pierce the ruby and durellum is such a poetic phrase for a quiet yet powerful revelation, or the piercing of a sacred boundary. Ruby and durellum could refer to a ruby-red halo, like those of cardinals, or simply the ear, oracle, suggesting the secret is whispered and heard, spreading through the subtle channels of society, impacting even Philly Thurston, a lay teacher of rural science. So even the most private of moments becomes public fodder, corrupting everything in its path. It's quite bleak, really.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, maybe even darkly funny. The scandal isn't just confined to polite society or the confessional anymore. It seeps down, like a pervasive stain, into the pubs and the racecourses. It becomes part of the fabric of everyday working-class life. The gospel eventually reaches Philly Thurston at a priestly flutter for safe and sane bets at the hippic run fields of breezy Baldoyle. A real Dublin racecourse, a vibrant social hub for all classes back then. The horse race itself, the classic Encourage Hackney plate, is just steeped in historical echoes. It involves horses named Bold Boy Cromwell, injecting Oliver Cromwell's conquest and colonial conflict right into this frivolous setting, and Captain Chaplain Blount's row Hinny St. Delo, and is eventually won by Winnie Widger. This scene then transitions to two Pisonans Kimcoes, poisonous Tomcoes, named Treacle Tom as was just out of prison, after the theft of a leg of Kehoe, Donnelly, and Pakenham's finished pork, and his own blood-and-milk brother Frisky Shorty. Quite the characters. Both are described as awful poor tipsters come off the hulks, prison ships, looking for an Oofberg game, a money-making scheme, or a Jimmy O'Goblin, a burglar's tool. They're scraping by. They overhear a parson using law language regarding a Mr. Adams, while the Seaforths was making the calling ball, a Scottish regiment making Irish girls cry, subtly referencing colonial oppression again. Treacle Tom, this transient figure who frequents common lodging houses where he slept in a nude state, hail fellow with meth and strange men's cots, is described as blotto after diverse tuts of hellfire, Red Biddy, Bulldog, Blue Ruin, and Creeping Jenny on race night. What a list of drinks. He's supplied by the Duck and Doggies, the Galloping Primrose, Bridget Brewster's, the Cock, the Postboy's Horn, and other pubs. Treacle Tom, with his vivid list of wild drinks and transient lifestyle, becomes a prime example of how these stories get passed around, adding to the layers of HCE's identity, infecting even the lowest strata of society.
This section vividly demonstrates the capillary action of gossip, how it flows through all strata of society, adapting to each environment, from the elite drawing rooms right down to the impoverished lodging houses. The horse race at Baldoyle, with its high stakes and diverse participants, becomes this microcosm of the larger social and political conflicts within Ireland. Even a sporting event is infused with historical tension. The phrase, "WW goes through the card," subtly suggests a meticulous review of all entries, like in a race, highlighting the careful, almost obsessive way gossip is consumed and analyzed. Bold Boy Cromwell dramatically injects Irish history and colonial conflict into the seemingly frivolous setting, suggesting that historical figures and their legacies are also part of the cyclical narrative of public judgment and retelling. And the Seaforths was making the calling ball, Scottish regiment making Irish girls cry, subtly references colonial oppression, grounding the story in a pervasive sense of historical grievance that was very real for Joyce's Dublin. Treacle Tom, whose name suggests something sweet yet sticky or troublesome, and Frisky Shorty, small but lively, represent the marginalized, impoverished classes of Dublin society. They're awful poor, they've come off the hulks, prison ships, and their oofbird game highlights their struggle for survival through petty crime, their lives a constant gamble. Their presence at the racecourse and in lodging houses shows that absolutely no corner of society is untouched by the spreading scandal. Treacle Tom's extensive drinking, blotto after diverse tots of hellfire, Red Biddy, Bulldog, Blue Ruin, and Creeping Jenny, and that long list of specific pubs he frequents, the Duck and Doggies, the Galloping Primrose, Bridget Brewster's, the Cock, the Postboy's Horn, paint this incredibly vivid picture of a culture of excess and the role of pubs as crucial centers for social interaction and, crucially, for rumor spreading. His transgressive lifestyle, including sleeping in a nude state, hail fellow with meth, and strange men's cots, further defines him as a deeply unrespectable figure, yet he is a crucial part of the narrative dissemination. It's the down and out who keep the story alive. And the parson discussing Mr. Adams in a law language, legal jargon, further shows how even formal systems and respectable figures are implicated in the spread of informal narratives, even in the most unlikely places and by unlikely characters. Gossip permeates everything.
It's such a stark, almost heartbreaking image when you think about it, isn't it? The story, born from a king's misunderstanding, shaped by public spectacle and high society gossip, ends up being whispered, snored, and dreamed by the homeless, the marginalized, the utterly dispossessed. Treacle Tom, after his binge on race night, seeks his bed in a housing room, abide with another at Block WW, Pump Court, the Liberties, evoking specific, historically significant Dublin locations and the communal, often impoverished, living conditions of common lodging houses back then. WW could even subtly stand for World War, hinting at the larger backdrop of chaos. He snored alcoherently, a masterful Joycean phrase, meaning he snored drunkenly and incoherently, yet somehow coherently transmitting. The substance of the tale of the evangelical Bissy-Bozzy and the Rumour, those distorted names for the two maidservants involved in HCE's original scandal. And this story is heard often the chilly night by a deeply unfortunate audience. A small and Stony Brook cash drapers executive, Peter Cloran, discharged, and O'Mara, an ex-private secretary of no fixed abode, locally known as Mildew Lisa, who had passed several nights in a doorway under the blankets of homelessness on the bunk of Iceland, pillowed upon the scone of destiny colder than man's knee or woman's breast. Just devastating imagery. Also present is Hosty, an ill-starred beach busker, most starved, with melancholia over everything in general, who was devising ways to get a parabellum, a gun, to blow the suicidal napper off himself. It's truly become a universal tale, hasn't it? Echoing through every single layer of society, reaching its most desperate and tragic corners.
This section profoundly illustrates the cyclical and all-encompassing nature of Joyce's narrative and HCE's identity. The story, once confined to royal observation and public scandal among the somewhat better off, now becomes the nightly solace or perhaps torment of the disenfranchised, the very people most vulnerable to society's cruelties. Risnord alcoherently is such a brilliant phrase. Treacle Tom quite literally snores or retells the story in his drunken, dreamlike state. It emphasizes the fragmented, dreamlike nature of the wake itself and the pervasive, distorting influence of alcohol on memory and narrative transmission. The evangelical Missy-Bozzy and the Risenurbian, those garbled names for the maidservants, confirms that the core scandal, however mutated and distorted, is still being retold, but now by the lowest strata of society, further altering and enriching or perhaps degrading the original story. The audience for this nightly retelling, Peter Cloran, a discharged cash drapers executive, and O'Mara, Mildew Lisa, an ex-private secretary of no fixed abode, both living in homelessness, literally pillowed upon the stone of destiny, cold and exposed, powerfully illustrates how HCE's scandal permeates even the absolute lowest rungs of society. This connects the everybody HCE represents, not just to power and wealth, but to destitution, mental illness, and utter despair. Hosty, contemplating violence and self-destruction, shows the dark, often tragic consequences of such a pervasive and destructive narrative. It reveals how a public figure's scandal can ripple out to affect the most vulnerable in society, touching every single aspect of the human condition. It truly solidifies HCE's universal identity, embodying the full spectrum of human experience and suffering. Hashtag tag tag outro chat.
So what does this all mean for HCE? And maybe what does it mean for us and for the very nature of storytelling itself? We followed HCE's journey from, well, a humble gardener who gets catapulted into legend by a king's whimsical mishearing. A mundane earwuggers becomes his defining name, Earwicker. We've seen how he transforms into Here Comes Everybody, this universal figure embodying all humanity, his life played out as a grand theatrical spectacle. We then dissected the anatomy of scandal, didn't we? Tracing how a questionable incident in Phoenix Park ripples outwards, through formal denials, whispered confessions to priests, and even the drunken fragmented retellings in common lodging houses and by the homeless. It's an incredible panorama of how identity is forged, warped, and ultimately consumed by society.
Yeah, zooming out a bit, this deep dive really reveals how identity in Finnegans Wake isn't some fixed monument, carved in stone. It's a constantly shifting, fluid narrative. It's a testament to how our sense of self is built on layers of miscommunication, embellished by gossip, and sustained by the collective, often unreliable memory of a community from the highest royalty right down to the lowest spalpeens. Joyce isn't just telling a story here. He's showing us how stories are made, unmade, and remade across time and social strata. His genius lies in making these processes themselves the central subject. He demonstrates that truth is forever mutable, elusive, and inextricably tied to the act of narration. It truly underscores how we, as individuals and as a society, are constantly constructing and reconstructing reality through the stories we tell.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it, how much of our own reputations or the reputations of public figures today are forged in the exact same crucible of fib fabrications and varied versions, often without any firm grasp of the actual facts. Joyce forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that what we believe to be solid fact might simply be the most compelling or the most pervasive story that's circulating. Think about how a single out-of-context quote, or maybe just a fleeting moment caught on camera, can reshape an entire career or persona today, becoming the new authenticated version in the public mind. It happens all the time. You've gained a unique insight today into how Joyce uses linguistic play, historical allusions, and these fragmented narratives to build a character that embodies a whole nation, a whole history, and ultimately maybe all of us. This deep dive should give you a new lens, hopefully, through which to view not just literature, but the very nature of identity and storytelling in our world. You might never quite trust a fact again without asking, okay, who's telling this story, and what's their occupational agnomen, what's their angle?
And consider this as a final thought. If HCE is truly Here Comes Everybody, and his entire story is born from a simple misunderstanding, perpetuated by gossip across all levels of society, and even becomes the solace or the torment of the most disenfranchised, what does that say about the very foundation of our shared humanity? It suggests that our collective identity might be a fragile, ever-evolving fiction, constantly shaped by the narratives we create, consume, and even dream about each other. It implies that to really understand ourselves, we must first understand the stories that define us, in all their glorious, messy, and often contradictory forms.
Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the pages of Finnegans Wake. We really hope you found some surprising facts and plenty of those aha moments that will stay with you long after this deep dive ends. Until next time, keep digging deeper into the stories that shape our world, and maybe question every fact you encounter just a little bit more.